I didn't wrap up my June reading and it is now the end of July. So here is a wrap up for both June and July. The reason I didn't wrap up June is because I haven't been reading that much, and some of the titles were for other videos or some of them I can't talk about, so I'm just going to do a 2-month situation and we're going to cover them all here. Ratty is also here being a nuisance, so you will see her in and out of shot. I started off by reading Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro and Cornelia Funke. This is a book of the film rather than the book that the film was inspired by. I am not going to talk to you about it because this is for another video and you will find out what I think about it then. Then I read The Caravanners by Elizabeth von Arnim, which is a Handheld Press title. I finally read something by Handheld Press, which is the indie publishing company that my mother runs and owns. I really enjoyed this. I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed this, and I would probably pick up more by Elizabeth von Arnim given half a chance. This is about a Prussian baron who is incredibly horrible, fascist, transphobic, misogynistic, all around shitty person. It's basically his diaries from when he went on a caravan holiday with his wife and some friends, and it's about how they all got on, basically. It is hilarious, and I will say he does get his comeuppance in the end, so he is supposed to be an unlikable protagonist. Don't read this if you're in a bad mood because he will make it worse. Then I read Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. This was also for the parents' taste test video. I hated this. It was like, I understand why it was so formative and why it was so important for fantasy at the time, but also I hated it. It was misogynistic, it was boring, and not for me. Not for me. If you want more thoughts, check out the reading vlog where I read my parents' library. Then I read a title that I can't talk about because it was published by St. Martin's Press and they have not got their shit together yet. What I will say is that this was an ARC, and nowhere on the press release or on any of the information was I given did it say anything about this being a St. Martin's Press title. I had to look it up and found out by chance. So didn't love that one. That one took me by surprise. I'm not sure I would have read it had I known from the beginning. Then I read Overture to Death, another one from my parents' vlog that went out a couple of weeks ago. Surprisingly enjoyed this. This is just a solid murder mystery. Really, really like Midsummer Murders vibes. Like solid Midsummer Murders vibes. Very, very enjoyable. Then I finally finished Angela Carter's book of fairy tales. So I have been reading this since October last year and I finally finished it. I've been reading it like before bed. I really, really love this collection. It is a huge representation of folktales, funny stories, myths from all over the world, and there's a huge range of them. But what I loved is that we are all telling the same stories. We are all telling silly nonsense stories. We're all sending people on silly quests where they have to complete 3 tasks. There is so much similarity between all of these stories, despite them being from all over the world. And my favourites were the Inuit tales. They were just like completely set apart from the rest and bizarre, and I loved. Then I read Matrix by Lauren Groff. Now this wasn't for any video. I managed a whole book in June that wasn't for a video. This is the story of a royal bastard in France who gets sent off to an abbey because they don't know what else to do with her, and it's relatively plotless. It's the story of her life and how she adapts to abbey life, and the fact that she's actually quite good at running things. So she ends up head of this abbey and not taking revenge on her sister, but just living her life and dealing with famine or people not paying their taxes and sort of tidying up the shitty job that the previous owners, the previous nuns that ran it, had done, and correcting their mistakes. Definitely more of a character study than an actual like novel situation. Yeah, didn't super blow me away, but I did enjoy it. Then I read Bug Boys by Laura Netzker. This is just a really cute graphic novel about 2 little bug boys going on adventures. It's middle grade, it's easy. I don't really know what else to say. It's a graphic novel about bug boys. I would recommend it. Then I read Masquerade by Oyo Sangoyomi. This was an ARC that I requested, and unfortunately I didn't love it. I think some areas were really interesting and I thought some areas could have been done a lot better. If you want to see my full thoughts on that, my review for the Fantasy Hive will be linked down below with all my other reviews on there, which is, yeah, it's a shame. I've heard that it was supposed to be a Hades and Persephone retelling. Maybe it's just that I don't like those, but it could have done so much more. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. It didn't have the effect that I think I wanted it to have on me. So that was a bit of a bummer. Then I finally finished The Grey House by Marion Petrosian. I've talked about this a little bit in some of my shorts that I've done, but this is the most joyful representation of disability I think I've read in a book ever. It is about it's translated from Russian, and it's about a residential home for physically disabled pupils and what they get up to there, basically. It's very Lord of the Flies-ish. They run wild. They do not give a shit what their counsellors want them to do. They don't go to lessons. They just do whatever they want. They have pet crows. They make juices in their room. They form little clans and gangs, and there are turf wars and there are myths, and the house is sort of semi-sentient as well, so it is fantasy. And it's 700 pages of plotless character study, and it's just fantastic. And I never thought I would say that about a book. I love plot. I don't love just characters and like looking at characters, but this is the huge exception for me, and I'm so glad I picked this up. It's on Everand if you want the audiobook, because that is much less intimidating. Then I read 2 bindery books in July. I kicked my July off with 2 very, very good books. The first one was Strange Beasts by Susan J. Morris. This is gaslight murder mystery in France. We follow Dr. Helena Moriarty and Sam Harker, so you recognise those names. It's that kind of a book. It is sort of supernatural, it is creepy, it is very spooky, it is lesbian. It was twisty and it was turny, and it showed me all the bits of Paris that I wanted to see in this kind of book. We went to the catacombs, we went to a perfumery, we went to the Moulin Rouge, like it's all of those places, and it was just really well done, and I really, really enjoyed this. I hugely recommend it. It's going to come out in October. I got the NetGalley art for both of these, so thank you very much to whoever approved me for those, because I also adored House of Frank by Kay Sinclair. This is a story that will break your heart in like the coziest, most comforting way possible. It's a huge exploration of grief. We follow our main character who is finally going to bury her sister, and she goes to the House of Frank to do it, which is this arboretum where there is a portal to this giant arboretum where people can bury their dead under a tree and have a tree grow out of them, like an alternative funeral service kind of thing. And it's run by Frank, who is this huge blue monster. I pictured like a more suave Sully from Monsters Inc. kind of, but he wears cardigans. He is a lovely, lovely guy. And there is an eclectic range of other people that live in this house that are all dealing with their own things. And when our protagonist, whose name I can't currently remember, decides that she can't actually bring herself to bury her sister straight away, Frank agrees to let her stay at the Arboretum until she is ready to do so. And we just explore all the different themes and all the different backstories from all these different characters. And it was just a 5-star book. I devoured this in 24 hours. It was so good. Then I finished off the Scholomance series finally. So I finished The Last Graduate and I started and finished The Golden Enclaves. This series just does not stop. It is so good. There is never a moment for you to breathe. It is just bang, 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 action, action, intrigue. Something else happens and something else happens, and you get swept up in this huge story that just gets bigger and bigger with every book, and I love it so much. If you've never heard of the Scholomance series, it starts with A Deadly Education, where we follow Elle, who is at this school for young wizardy, magic-y people who need to be at this school because Maleficaria, or like demons, want to hunt them and eat them so they can consume their magic. So they all get put in this school to keep them safe, basically, except Mals can get into the school, so they are never actually safe and they are constantly in danger. Like, there is no safe place in this school, despite it being the safest place for them in the world at large. It is funny, it is witty, it is incredibly sad if you let yourself like get swept up in like the gravity of what's happening, but there is that dry humour to sort of balance it out a little bit so it's not entirely miserable. Then following the miserable theme, I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is a graphic novel memoir about growing up in Iran when the war started, and about Marjane and how she ended up moving to Austria for a little bit because her parents sent her away in order for her to be safe. So it's about her growing up basically in these bizarre conditions. It is heart-wrenching. Just because it's a graphic novel, please don't think it's not incredibly sad and incredibly disturbing at times, because it goes into a lot of detail about what it was like living in the war and what happened to friends and family that spoke up against the dictatorship. And it was a really hard read in the beginning. I really struggled and had to take lots of breaks. It kind of smooths out in the middle and then gets really hard again. So go into this prepared, but I do highly recommend this book. It was really, really good. Then I've read Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. This is the third in the Diviners series. So the Diviners is 1920s supernatural murder mystery with much bigger consequences than you might originally think. We follow a huge diverse cast of characters in 1920s New York who are all diviners, who all have powers of some kind. Evie is our main protagonist. She is a flapper at heart. She is like exactly what you would think of as when you think of a flapper, and she can read objects. So she can, if she picks something up, she can see its history, she can see who owned it, gets flashes of like what happened to this object, that kind of thing. And I'll be honest, I can't remember what the main plot of the first book is now because I've now finished the series, but it's usually murder mysteries, it's usually ghosty sort of things. What Libba Bray does really well is she portrays America how it was then, and there is this huge element of commentary on xenophobia and inclusion and how America was born and what it's like to feel American and what makes an American. And we touch on the slave trade and immigration. The KKK is brought up later on in the series. All of these different elements of America, the good, the bad and the ugly, are all like pulled together into this main theme of like the birth of America and what that really meant. She's now playing with some nail clippers on a table and is being very noisy about it. Do you mind? And then finally, the last book I read in July was The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. This is a horror novel. It is kind of a dystopia. We follow this library at Mount Char, which is ostensibly run by God, and he has a bunch of children looking after the different catalogues in his library, and everything in the known world is contained in this library. Like all the knowledge in the world is there. But it appears that God might have gone missing and his children are looking for him, and thus follows supremely disturbed and bizarre story that I find it very hard to quantify. There are so many trigger warnings in this. Necrophilia, bestiality, death, gore, like rape, like really some really fucked up stuff. And I don't feel qualified to say whether or not it was handled well. It is there for shock value, and I will say that it is shocking. I think that's as much as I feel qualified to comment on. I didn't love this as much as some people loved it. I thought, regardless of some of the more disturbing elements, I thought the plot fell flat. I think it needed to end about 150 pages earlier than when it did. And when I got to I felt it needed to end at about the 3/4 mark because I could not see why we were still talking about the plot. Like at that point it was really unclear why the book was still continuing, and you only got payback right at the very end. So mixed feelings about that one, but I'm glad I read it. That was everything I read in June and July. I'm definitely taking reading a lot slower at the moment, and I am so okay with that, and I hope it continues. And I love that I have got a good few 5 stars in there because we had a bit of a slump, and I think we're coming out of it now, and I think that's positive. So stick around, do subscribe if you want to see more, give us a like if you liked the video, and I will see you next Sunday.